This video is sponsored by Linode. No matter what technology stack you build on, Linode makes it easy for both beginners and power users to host apps, sites, and projects in the cloud. To get $20 towards your new account, visit linode.com/Traversy. Hey, what's going on, guys? So I figured we'd do something a little different today. We're going to build a desktop GUI application with Python. We're actually going to use a library called Tkinter or Tkinter, some people pronounce it. And it just allows you to build GUI applications on Windows and Mac, and I think Linux as well. And we're going to build a part manager for a computer repair shop. So basically, the idea is that, they get a customer and maybe they need to order a power supply or some memory or something, and they can add in the part name, like we can say, 700 watt PSU customer, and the retailer that we plan on getting it from. So we'll say Newegg, and the price, we'll say 180. Okay, we can go ahead and add the part, gets added down here. So it's basically a CRUD application, but it's a desktop, a GUI application. And we can go ahead and select one, and we can update. So let's say we want to change the price to 170. We can update it. We can remove it, and we can also clear the text. If there's text in here, we can clear the inputs. All right, and we got a scroll bar here as well. So if it goes below a certain point, we'll be able to scroll. And I admit it's not the best looking application. There's virtually no style to it, but you can add style with the Tkinter library. But I don't really want to focus on that. I want to focus more on creating these widgets and adding functionality to them. And as far as the database, we're going to be using SQLite, which I think is fine for something like this, where you're not going to have a ton of data. It's just a small personal application, which I think it's fine for. But you could just as well use MySQL or Postgres or whatever you'd like. All right, so let's jump into VS Code. And I just have an empty folder here called Part Manager. So I'm going to open up my terminal. And of course, you need to have Python installed with the pip package manager. And what you want to do is install pipenv. Okay, I already have it installed, so I'm not going to run this, but that will install pipenv on your system. And then you can create a virtual environment with pipenv shell, rather than just doing everything globally and installing any dependencies we have globally on our system. We'll install it into this virtual environment, and it should create this pip file right here, which will show any dependencies, any packages that we install. So we want to select the correct interpreter in VS Code, so Command-Shift-P, and if you just search for Python, you'll see this select interpreter, and we're just going to go to this part manager right here. All right, so now what we're going to do is use pipenv to install our dependencies, which is Tkinter or Tkinter. I don't know. Different people say it differently. And then also something called PyInstaller, because what I want to try doing is creating an executable file out of our Python script at the end of this, which worked flawlessly on Windows. I actually created this on Windows, and PyInstaller worked perfectly, but then on Mac I ran into some issues. I read that there's some bugs, so I don't know. We'll try it at the end. And then we also want to install TK message box, which is just like an alert component type thing. Okay, so those are the three dependencies. All right, so now what we want to do is just create a couple files. Let's create a file called part_manager.py, and let's create db.py. So basically, part manager is our main script, and then db.py is where we'll create a database class to insert records and fetch and all that stuff. So we're going to start off in part manager. And let's first just bring in Tkinter, and we're going to import everything from it. And we need to create an app variable, and we're going to set that equal to the tk method, which will basically allow us to create a window or window object. And then to run the project, or we'll just say start program, we need to call app and then there's a method called main loop. Okay, so just these lines of code right here. What's this? I don't need that. Just these couple lines of code, we should be able to run Python and then part manager.py, and it's going to open up a window. Okay, and obviously it's going to look a little different if you're on Windows and if you're on Mac, but it should it should do the same thing. You should just have a window with your close buttons and this TK in the title. Now I want to change this title, obviously. I also want to set this to a certain height and width. So what I'm going to do is take this app variable and change the title to part manager. Now as far as resizing the window, there's different ways to do it. I'm going to use a method called geometry, and what this does is we can pass in the width times the height. So I'm going to say 700 times 350. Now depending on, if you're on Windows or Mac, or your screen size, your resolution, you might have to tweak this a little bit. There might be a few values you need to tweak to make this look right on your system, but this seems to work for me. All right, I'm just going to install this AutoPep 8 thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and now run this again. So we want to run, what the heck, Python part manager py. All right, so this is what we should get. You can see the titles change, and we have this 700 by 350 window. All right, so now what we want to do is start to add widgets. And the first one, if we look at the finished product here, you can see this is a widget, this is a label right here. This is an entry, a label, entry, and then we have buttons, then we have a list box, and we have a scroll bar. So we need to create these widgets and basically place them on the grid. That's what we're going to use as a grid system here, which has rows and columns. So let's go ahead and create our label for the part name. So I'm going to go right here and let's say part. So first thing we're going to do is create a variable called part text and set this to a string variable, string var, like that. And then we need to create a label. So we have access to this label. We can create a label object because we brought it in from this Tkinter. We brought in everything up here. That's why we can use this and this. And this will take in our TK method, which I called app. Sometimes you'll see it called root or window, but I called it app. And then we need to pass in our text, which is going to be, actually I'm going to use single quotes. This is going to be part name, and then we can also add some styling like the font. So for font, I'm going to set it to bold and 14 for the size. And then I also want a little bit of padding. If we look at the final product here, you can see that there's some space here and here, so some padding on the y-axis. So for that we can do pad y equals, and I'm going to use 20. Now just doing that isn't going to place it. We need to place it in the grid, so we're going to take the part label and call .grid. And then here we put in a row, which I'm going to say row equals 0, and also a column, and column is also going to be 0. So let me just kind of explain how this works. So basically this is a grid. So picture I should have actually created an image with some lines, but picture a line going right down here. So a line going here and here. So this is the first row, which has an index of 0. So this is row 0. This is column 0. Okay? So we want to be in row 0, column 0, which is right here. This would be row 0, column 1, row 0, column 2, row 0, column 3. Okay, this second row would be row 1 because it's 0, 1. So this would be row 1, column 0, row 1, column 1, row 1, column 2, row 1, column 3, and so on. All right, so we want 0, 0. And then if we save this and we run this, let's check it out. And we have our label in the 0, 0 position. Okay, so the next thing we want is the entry. We want it right here, which is going to be row 0, column 1. Okay, because this is column 0, and we want column 1 for the entry. So let's say part entry, and we're going to set this to an entry widget, which takes in our app, and it's also going to take in a text variable, which is going to be equal to part text, which is our string var that we created up here. Okay, so basically we're binding this entry to that. And then we need to place that on the grid. So part entry dot grid, same deal. We pass in a row, which is going to be 0 because it's going to be on the, to the right of it, but it's going to be column 1. Okay, and you can change things around if you don't like the look of this. I mean, you can put whatever you want wherever you want. Let's see. I also want to align the label to the left. So in this part label dot grid, I'm going to add another property called sticky. So, and this is kind of weird. It takes in like W or E for west or east. We want to align it to the left, so we want to use W. We're aligning it to the west, which is a little weird, but that's just the syntax. So let's save this and let's open it up. And now we have a label here, and we have our entry here, which is bound to this part text string variable. All right, so the rest of the labels and inputs are pretty similar. So I'm just going to grab this and copy it down. That's 2, 3, 4, because we have 4 fields total. And then let's see, this here is going to be customer. So let's go ahead and just replace all these parts with customer. And then we'll just change the text here to customer. We actually don't need the padding on the last 3. It can only be on, we only need it on the first one because it will bump the rest of them down. So let's just take all these and get rid of them. We just want it on the first one up here. All right, so customer label grid. Now for the positioning here, customer's on the same line as part, so we still want row 0. However, we want to go the next column over, which is going to be 2. And then for the entry, same row, but we're going to go over to 3. All right, so that's customer. The next one is retailer. So we'll go ahead and place all these with retailer. Okay, and let's see, we'll change the text here to retailer. And as far as the label goes, now we're going to move down a row. So row 1, column 0, text variable retailer text, that's correct. The entry is going to be row 1, column 1. Okay, and then we have finally the price. So we're going to change this stuff to price. And let's change this to price. Whoops. Price, and the positioning is going to be row 1, column. See if you can figure it out. So retailer and price are going to be on the same line, which is row 1. The retailer label is 0. The retailer entry is 1. So what is the price label going to be? It's going to be 2, right? And then the entry is going to be 3, row 1. All right, so that should do it as far as the labels and entries. So let's save that and take a look. And there we go. All right, so these will actually get pushed over after we add our list box, because we're actually going to span some rows, and it will actually push these over a little bit. So let's create our list box, which is going to be our parts list. So we'll say parts list, which is a list box widget. So we'll call this parts list, and let's set this to a list box. Pass in our app, and we can pass in a height here. We're going to do height equals 8, and width equals 50. And you might have to again mess with some of these depending on what screen you're using and stuff like that. Let's see, I don't want a border, but I'm not going to add border 0 yet, just so we can see the actual outline of this. So we need to add this to the grid. So let's take our parts list dot grid, and let's see, we want to put this on row 3, because remember we have row 1 and wait a minute, yeah, row 0 and row 1 are the inputs and labels. row 2 is going to be the buttons. The buttons are actually going to go above the list box, but I'm going to do the buttons last. So this is going to be row 3. And then let's see, we want to do column 0 because we want to start all the way over to the left. And then we're also going to add a column span. This is kind of like doing a table with HTML if you want to span table rows or whatever. So column span, we're going to set that to 3. And then we also want to do a row span, and let's do that. Let's do 6, and then add some padding on the y-axis, 20, and then padding on the x-axis of 20. All right, so let's save that. Let's take a look. Okay, so this is what we get. It's our list box. Now, like I said, I don't want the border, but I just wanted to leave it there so you could see, the size of it and where it's located. But I'm going to set here inside the list box border equals 0. And now if I run that, you can see that we can't even see the list box if there's no data in it. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is add a scroll bar. And the way that this works is a little weird. We got to create the scroll bar first and then kind of link it to the list box. So let's say create scroll bar. So we'll create a variable called scroll bar and set that equal to capital S scroll bar. And this is going to take in just the app. And then we want to put it on the grid. So scroll bar dot grid. And we're going to say row 3, which is the same row as the list box. And then let's do column 3, because remember we spanned, the list box spans 3 columns. So we're going to put the scroll bar in the one next to it. Basically, it was the list box is 0, 1, 2, and then we're going to put the scroll bar in 3. So, I mean, that should at least show up now, I believe. So if we take a look. Okay, so it does show up, but it's not connected to the list box yet. So what we need to do now, let's say set scroll to list box. So we take our parts list, which is our list box, and we just call dot configure. And we want to pass in here the y scroll command. And we're going to set that to our scroll bar variable, which has a property called set. Okay, and then we want to take our scroll bar and call dot configure. And then we're going to pass in here a command. Okay, and our buttons will also have commands, basically something that will happen when they're used. And we're going to set this to parts list dot y view. So basically scroll along the y-axis. All right, so if we save this, I mean, we're not going to really see anything here because there's no data, but I'll show you, once we add some data, that we'll be able to scroll if we need to. Okay, so let's see. The next thing we'll do is add our buttons. So let's go down here and say buttons. So we're going to have 4 different buttons: add, remove, update, and clear. Clear the text or clear the input, whatever. So let's do the add button, call it add_btn, set it to a button, pass in app, and this is going to take in text, what we want the button to say, which is going to be add part. Okay, and then we can set a width. I'm going to say width 12, and then it's going to have a command, which is going to be add_item. So this is going to be a function that we need to create. Okay, and then we need to add this to the grid, so add button.grid. So you can see, I mean, the available widgets and how we add them to the UI using this .grid and using the columns and rows. So we're going to go row 2 because it's going to be above the list box, which is row 3. And then let's say column equals 0 because it's going to be the first button, so we want it all the way to the left. And let's do padding y equals 20, which we only need to put on the first button. And then we can grab this, and yeah, we'll just copy that and We need 4 more. So the second one is going to be remove. Okay, so let's change. Let's see. Yeah, we'll just change all these to remove. And then let's change this to remove part. Remove item is going to be the command. That's good. And then as far as this goes, we don't need the padding. And it's going to be row 2, column 1, because we want it to be to the right of the add button. Okay, and then this one here is going to be update. So say update part. And update item will be the command. We don't need this. And then the row is going to be 2, and the column is going to be 2. So 0, 1, 2. And then this last one here is going to be clear. And let's change, let's say clear input. And it's going to be called clear text is going to be the function name. And it's going to be column 3. All right. Now if I save this and I try to run it, we're going to get an error because we're calling commands or we're calling functions here that don't exist. So I'm going to put these up here. Now I'm going to also have in the repository, in the description, I'm going to have an object-oriented version of this script as well. But I didn't want to do it in the video because I want to keep it simple and focus on the syntax for this library and how to create the interface. I didn't really want to get into, creating classes and stuff. Although we are going to create a database class, but it's a little more understandable. So I will have that in the repository as well. So let's create these functions. I'm actually going to go up here. So we're going to have a function called populate list, which is going to be responsible for actually getting the data. And for now, we'll just do prints. I didn't really plan this. Yeah, we'll just say print populate. And then let's see, we want our add item. Yeah, so add item, and we'll just do a print add. What else we have? Remove item. Let's do update. Update. And what else do we have? Clear. So define clear text. All right. So let's save that, and this should at least run. Okay, there we go. So we can see our buttons. Good. Let's see. So if I click add, you can see down here in the console, it logs add, remove, update, and clear. So we know that these buttons are now hooked to these functions. The populate, we actually want to run that. I mean, we could create a button to fetch the data, but I want it to just show when this opens. So we're simply going to just call that down here. We'll go right above our main loop here, and let's just say populate data, and we'll call populate list here. So now when we run this, you can see we get populate. All right, so as far as this goes, I think we're all set for now because we need to create our database stuff. So let's go into db.py and let's import SQLite 3, and we're going to create a class database. I mean, you don't have to use a class, but I think that it's much more organized and it's less code if we do it this way. And it's pretty easy to understand. If you've worked with classes in any other language, it's not much different. Basically, we need a constructor, although in Python it's called an initializer or init. So we want to define _init . And all these methods inside the class are going to take in self, which is like this in many other languages. In JavaScript, PHP, you use this. In Python, we use self. It's also going to take in the database. So when we initialize a database class, we're going to pass in the database name that we want to call it. Now, as far as what we want to do here, we basically want to set up our connection, and we also want to create our table. We're going to have a table called parts, and that's where all this stuff is going to be stored. So we need to take self, which is like using this in many other languages. And so basically we're setting a property called connection, or CONN, and we're going to set that to SQLite 3.connect, which is how we can connect to a database, and pass in DB, which is going to get passed in when we initialize this class, or the object from this class. And then we're going to have a cursor, so self.cur. So cursor is basically used to execute queries. So we want to set this to self.con, which is our connection, and then .cursor. So this is just how SQLite works. And then what we do if we want to execute a query is we'll say self.cursor.execute, and then we can put our SQL statement in here, which in this case is going to be create table if not exists. If it already exists, we don't want to create it. So we're going to create parts, and then we have to put the fields in here that we want. So we want an ID, which is going to be an integer, and also the primary key, and it should auto increment by default as well. And then we have our part, which is going to be text. We have our customer, which is going to be text, retailer. These are all just text fields. And then what's the other one? Price, text. All right, so that should create the table. Now we have to commit this. So self.cursor, I'm sorry, not cursor, con, connection, and then commit. And that's it. So that should set up our connection, and then it should set up our cursor and then execute this SQL query to create a table. So now we need basically our CRUD operations. So let's define, we'll just call this one fetch. This is going to be to fetch the data, and all these methods are going to take in self, and we're going to take self.cursor.execute and simply execute select all from parts. Okay, and then we're going to have a variable called rows, and we're going to set this to self.cursor, and we can use this fetch all method here, which will just get all the rows and then simply return the rows. And that's it. Okay, so next we want to do our insert. So insert, it's going to take in self, but it's also going to take in the part, customer, retailer, and price. All right, so now let's see, we're going to execute. So let's say cursor, execute, and we're going to do an insert here. So let's say insert into parts and our values. So we're going to do a little replacement here to protect from SQL injection. So first for ID is going to be null, and then we just want some question marks, which are just placeholders for each field. And then we want to go after our closing quote here and put a comma, and then we want what we want to replace it with, which are going to be these variables, these arguments that are passed in. So part, customer, retailer, and price. All right, and then we just have to commit it. So self.connection.commit. All right, so that's our insert. Next we'll do the remove. So define remove, takes in self. It's also going to need an ID, so we know which part we're removing or deleting. And we're going to say self.cursor.execute, and let's say delete from parts where. So we just need a where clause where ID equals question mark, and then we'll do our replacement. And we'll pass in ID. Now we need a trailing comma. If you're not really familiar with Python, if you have a tuple, which is what this is, if you have a tuple that only has one value, then you need a trailing comma. So that's why that's there. I know it's a little weird. So then we need to commit this. So self.connection.commit. All right, and then we want to do an update. So the update is going to take in self, and then it's going to take in everything, the ID, because we need to know which one we're updating, and then the actual data. So customer, retailer, did I just say retainer? Retailer, and then price. And then we can go ahead and execute our query. And the query is going to be an update. So we want to say update the parts table, and we want to set the part equal to question mark, customer equal to question mark. I'm sure I spelled a couple things wrong here. Retailer equals question mark, price, and then we need our where clause, so where ID equals question mark, and then we just need our to replace everything. So we want part, right? We get our part, customer, retailer, price, and ID. So we're just replacing these question marks here. Retailer, price, ID. All right, and then we just need to commit it. So we'll just grab that, put that there. All right, so there's one more thing I want to do, and that is create a destructor. Just like you can have a constructor that runs, when the object is instantiated, you can have a destructor method that's called when all references to the object have been deleted. So we do that in Python with _del, and this will take in self. And what I want to do is just close the connection. So self.connection.close. All right, and that's it. So let's save that. And what I'm going to do is just populate the database with some data. So the way that we can do that, I'm just going to run it once from this file just to get the data in there and create the database. So when you want to instantiate something, an object from a class, we need to just set this to the class name, which is database. And remember, it takes in the database name, which I'm going to call store.db. All right, so that will instantiate it, and then we can use this DB to call any of these methods, and we want to call insert because that's what we're doing, is inserting some stuff into the database. Now I'm just going to paste this in because it's just a bunch of insert statements. You can copy it if you want. It should be in the repository commented out if you want to grab it from there. Basically, we just have the part, the customer, the retailer, and the price. All right, so I'm going to save this, and then let's go down to our terminal, and let's just run python db.py. And you can see over here it created a store.db file. And you guys don't have to do this, but I have SQLite Studio installed, so I just want to show you that I can open the database here and see the data. So I'm going to go up to my menu, which you can't see, but I'm going to go to database and then add database, and click on the folder here and choose store DB, and we should be able to see that. What's going on here? Connect. Okay, so there's our parts table, so we should be able to get the data. Let's say I haven't used this in quite a while. Yeah, generate query, so we'll say select, and we'll just select from parts. And let's run this. So we'll click play, and there we go. So you can see that the data is in fact in our SQLite database. All right, so we know that that's there. Now I'm going to just comment all this out because we don't want to run this again, and save. And then we're going to go back to part manager, and now we need to be able to call those methods from our database class in these methods here when we click the button. So what we'll do is we need to first import our DB, our database. So let's say from DB, let's import the database class, and then let's say from, not from, DB equals database. So we're just instantiating this DB object just like we did in the other file, and we're going to use our store.db. Okay, so we already have the table created, so it's not actually going to create this. It's just going to basically use it. And then let's see, down in our populate list, let's get rid of that, and we're going to loop through. So let's say for, we'll call this row, in DB, and then we're going to call the fetch method. So basically we're going to loop through these rows, because remember, this fetch method returns the rows that we get from fetch all. So we're going to loop through those, and then we're going to take our parts list, which is the list box widget, and we're going to insert. Okay, it actually has a method called insert, and we want to insert it on the end, and we want to insert the row, the current row in the loop. So let's go ahead and save that. And if we run our application, so we want to run part manager, now you can see we're getting everything here. Okay. Now I just want to show you, because we're going to call populate lists a few different times, and I don't want to populate it more than once. Like, let me give you an example. Actually, let me close that up first. But if I were to call populate list again down here, let's copy that down and save, and then run this, you'll see that now we have, it's been populated twice, and you can also see the scroll bar works. I don't want that to happen though, so what we're going to do is right before we run this loop, we're going to call parts list, and we're going to call delete, okay, which is a method we can use on the list box, and we want to delete everything. So we're going to say 0 end. 0 end, yeah. So now, even though I have populate list twice, if we run this, notice that we only get what's in the database once. It doesn't repeat itself. All right, and then let's just make sure we get rid of that second populate list. All right, so we have that all set. Now let's do the add item. Now I do want to have a little bit of validation. Actually, we'll do the validation after. Let's just do the basic insert. So we want to insert it into the database first. So we're going to take DB and call insert. And this is going to take in the data. So if we look at our add item, not add item, insert, it's going to get part, customer, retailer, price. Now to get the data from the entry, because that's what we want to pass in here, we can do that with the text, so like part text, for instance, and then we can call the get method. That'll actually get whatever's typed in. Okay, so we want to pass that in, as well as the customer.get, as well as the retailer.get, and price.get. All right, so yeah, that should do it. And then what we want to do is basically delete everything from the list. So I'm just going to copy this up here, and then we want to insert into the list. So we can do that with parts list, because what this line does right here is it simply inserts into the database. It's not going to insert it into the actual list box. That's what we're doing here. So we're going to call dot insert into the end, and then we just want to pass in here, we actually want to pass in a tuple here, and I'm going to grab all of this data right here. Okay, so basically we're just passing in a tuple with all of the data. I'm sorry, this should be text. These should all have underscore text. Yeah, so price text, retailer text. Yeah, oops. Text. Okay, so it should be the underscore text and then dot get. So that should insert it. Let's see, what do I want to do after that? So after we do that, let's repopulate the list. So we'll just call populate list. And like I said, I do have an object-oriented version of this in the GitHub repository. So let's save this and try it out. So we'll run it, and let's say we're going to add a 700 watt PSU for John Doe. Say Amazon 170 and add part, and there it is. Okay, so it gets added. Now, the issue that I have with this is if we clear all these out and we click add part, it just adds this all this empty stuff here, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is have a little bit of validation here, and I want it to have a message box. So this is where that TK message box comes in that I installed. So we're going to say from Tkinter import message box, and in the add item we can just do some very simple validation here. Let's say if what do I want to say here? If we don't even need that, part text.get is equal to nothing, or customer underscore text dot get is equal to nothing, or what else? Retailer text get price text dot get equal to nothing. All right, so if that is true, then let's take our message box, and there's a method called show error. So you can show info, show warning, show error, and then we're just going to pass in here required fields, which I believe is the title, and then the message is going to be please include all fields, and then we're just going to return from this. Okay, so let's save that. I have prettier enabled and auto format. So sometimes in Python I notice that the VS Code auto format screws things up in terms of the indents. So hopefully we don't run into that. Oops, I have to close it first. Let's close that up and let's run this again. Alright, so now if I try to add part, there we go. We get a nice little pop-up that says please include all fields. So we can't do this anymore. We have to fill in our fields. Let's see. So let's do the remove. So we'll close that up. We'll go down to remove item. And this is actually going to be a little different because we need to know which one we're removing. And basically, I'm just going to run it again to show you. We can go ahead and select from our list box, and we need to select the one that's selected to remove it. So before we even do remove item, we're going to have another method called select item, and this is going to take in an event. And basically what we're going to do is bind the list box to this function here. So the way that we can do that is, let's go down to where we have our list box, parts list. Actually, we'll go right here and let's say bind select. So basically we want to bind the select to the select item function. So parts list, and we can call a method called bind, and in here we're going to put in these double, this is kind of weird syntax, but these double angle brackets, and then list box select, like that, and then the function we want to bind to, which is called select item. Alright, so now I'm going to go up here, and in select item, for now I'm just going to do a print, and let's just print select and make sure that this works. So let's run this, and now each time I click, watch in the console, we get select, select, select. Okay, so we know that that's working. We were able to bind the the item we select to the select item function. So now this is a little tricky here. What we're going to do is set a global variable so that we can use this in the remove item. And this makes a little more sense in the object-oriented version. I mean, that's the version I would actually use if I were actually building this, but like I said, I didn't want it to get too complicated. So we're going to say global selected item, because we could have just had it as a property to a class. And then we need to get the index, so we're going to say index equals, the way that we do that is the parts list, which is the list box. We can call dot CUR, so cur selection, and we want the first one, we just want to pass in 0 here. And then we're going to have another variable called selected underscore item, or not created, but we're taking this selected item and we're going to set it to parts list, and then we can call dot get, and we can pass in the index. And just to show you what this gives us, let's just do a print of selected item. All right, so we're going to run this. If I click on that, there you go. You can see we get the data every time I select. Okay, so now what we need to do is we want to add, before we do get to the remove, I shouldn't have even mentioned the remove yet, because what we need to do first is when we actually select, we want to put the data into these entries. Okay, so let's do that. We'll get rid of that, and I mean, first thing we want to do is delete the entry and then insert it. So let's take the part entry and let's call dot delete. So we want to delete 0 to end, and then we want to take part entry, and then we want to insert end, and we can get what we need with selected item and then the index of 1 here. All right, so we just need to do this for all the fields. So I'm just going to copy this down. Let's see, 2, 3, 4, and this here. Yeah, we'll grab this, and that's going to be customer, and then let's change these to retailer, and these to price. Okay, and then we just need to change over here. This will be 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we'll save that. And let's run this. And now if I select one of these, you see that the data gets, I mean, first it deletes from each entry and then it adds the data. All right, so now for the remove. This is actually going to be pretty easy because we have access to this selected item, which is a global variable. So let's say db dot, we're going to call remove from our database class, and just simply pass in the selected item 0. And then let's populate the list. So we'll run this again. So if we go down here and I click remove, there we go. Let's get rid of this, remove, good. Now for the clear text, we want to do just that. We want to be able to clear the input. Also, for instance, once we add a part, I want to clear the text as well. Once we remove it, I want to clear it. So we're going to use it in a few different places. So let's do the clear text before we actually do the update, which is going to be really easy. We basically just need to call all these deletes. So I'm going to copy all of these right here, and then in clear text, we only need the deletes, so I'm just going to place a cursor here, 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 and here, and we'll go ahead and just, whoops, what did I just do? Let's delete There we go. All right, so that will just delete everything. Let's try it out. So remember, this button here, clear input, calls clear text. So if we click that, there we go. Okay, and we just want to call it also up here where we add the item right before we populate the list. Let's call clear text. I don't like how VS Code formatted this. So we'll call it there. Let's also call it right here. Okay, that should do it. And then let's do our update. And then I think we should be all set. So for the update, we're just going to call db update. And we need to pass in the ID, which is going to be the selected item, 0. And then all of, this stuff up here. Where can I get this from? Right here. So this insert, I'm just going to grab all the arguments we passed in here, which are just all the entry texts, and then pass those in here. So yeah, and then it's up to you if you want to clear it after update. I'm not going to, just in case you want to change something else. So I'm going to get rid of clear text, but we do want to populate the list. Oh, I put it in the wrong spot. Hold on a second. Let me just undo what I just did. Remove, that's right. Yeah, I want to put this here. Sorry if that confused you. Populate list, and good. So let's try the update. So we'll go down here and let's change this to 140. Change Newegg to Amazon. What's this? Index error, tuple index out of range. Oh, we might have to fix that. Let's make sure this update works. Good. So you can see that that updated the data. So for this index error here, tuple index out of range, I want to ignore this. And I don't think I did this in my script. No, I didn't. Let me just check something. So basically, when we select the item right here, let's put a TryCatch here. So basically, everything that we do here, let's go ahead and put a try block, and then we can just push that over, and then catch. So basically, not catch. What am I saying? We want to put an except here. So if it's an index error, then we're going to just pass. All right, so we shouldn't get that error anymore. Let's run this. Whoops, what the hell? Okay, so let's do an update again. 140. All right, so we're not getting that error. Okay, if I click in here anywhere. All right, so our application is done. Now I'm going to attempt to use PyInstaller here. So I'm just going to close this up and clear my terminal. And if you are on Windows, you should be able to just run PyInstaller and then the name of the script, which is part manager.py, and then we just want to add --one file because we want to create one executable, and then --windowed since it's a GUI program. So if you run this on Windows, everything should be okay. On Mac, unfortunately, the file just doesn't open, and it took me a little while to find it, but I guess there's a bug on Mac when you do it this way. So the only solution that I could find, I'm just going to delete this, is, let me see, I'm just going to paste it in here because it's kind of long. I'll paste it into part manager py, and this will be in the GitHub. So basically we need to add this add binary as well, and make sure that you have the name of the script here. If you use something different, you want to put that there. And yeah, so we're going to call this. So let's copy that and go down here and paste. Run it. And what it's going to do is create, it's going to create a build folder, and it's going to create a dist folder. The dist folder is where the program should be. So I'm going to open up dist, and you should have this part manager. And if we click on it, this opens up, and you'll also have your terminal here open up along with it. But now we do actually have an executable, and it should work. So let's try it out. We'll say, I don't know, 4 gigabytes of RAM for Sam Smith from Amazon. Price, I don't know, 140. Add part. Okay, there we go. Good. Yeah, let's try to update it. Make sure everything works. Change that to 150 and update. Okay, clear input works. And if we remove, that works. All right, so we were able to create an executable. So we'll just close this up and close that up. And that's it. So, I mean, obviously this is a very small, simple application, but it gives you an idea on how to start to create your own GUI apps with Python and Tkinter. So that's it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a like, and I'll see you next time.